This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Annie Coleman in St. Louis, Missouri in July 2006. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 40. We was feelin' pretty good after breakfast, and took the canoe and went over the river a-fishin' with a lunch, and had a good time, and took a look at the raft and found her all right, and got home late to supper, and found them in such a sweat and worry they didn't know which end they was standin' on, and made us go right off to bed the minute we was done supper, and wouldn't tell us what the trouble was, and never let on a word about the new letter, but didn't need to because we knowed as much about it as anybody did. And as soon as we was half upstairs and her back was turned, we slid for the cellar cupboard and loaded up a good lunch and took it up to our room and went to bed and got up about 11:30, and Tom put on Aunt Sally's dress that he stole and was going to start with the lunch, but says, "Where's the butter?" "I laid out a hunk of it," I says, "on a piece of a corn pone." "Well, you left it laid out then, it ain't here." "We can get along without it," I says. "We can get along with it, too," he says. "Just you slide down cellar and fetch it, and then mosey right down the lightning rod and come along. I'll go and stuff the straw into Jim's clothes to represent his mother in disguise, and be ready to baa like a sheep and shove soon as you get there." So out he went, and down cellar went I. The hunk of butter, big as a person's fist, was where I had left it, so I took up the slab of corn pone with it on, and blowed out my light, and started upstairs very stealthy, and got up to the main floor all right, but here comes Aunt Sally with a candle, and I clapped the truck in my hat and clapped my hat on my head, and the next second she see me, and she says, "You been down cellar?" "Yes'm." "What you been doing down there?" "Nothin'." "Nothin'?" "No'm." "Well, then what possessed you to go down there this time of night?" "I don't know'm." "You don't know? Don't answer me that way, Tom. I want to know what you been doing down there." "I ain't been doing a single thing, Aunt Sally. I hope to gracious if I have." I reckon she'd let me go now, and as a general thing she would, but I suppose there were so many strange things going on she was just in a sweat about every little thing that warn't yardstick straight, so she says, very decided, "You just march into that settin' room and stay there till I come. You been up to something you no business to, and I lay I'll find out what it is before I'm done with you." So she went away as I opened the door and walked into the settin' room. My, but there was a crowd there. 15 farmers, and every one of them had a gun. I was most powerful sick, and slunk to a chair and set down. They was sittin' around, some of them talking a little, in a low voice, and all of them fidgety and uneasy, but trying to look like they warn't, but I knowed they was, because they was always taking off their hats and putting them on and scratching their heads and changing their seats and fumbling with their buttons. I warn't easy myself, but I didn't take my hat off all the same. I did wish Aunt Sally would come and get done with me and lick me if she wanted to, and let me get away and tell Tom how we'd overdone this thing and what a thunderin' hornet's nest we'd got ourselves into, so we could stop fooling around straight off and clear out with Jim before these rips got out of patience and come for us. At last she come and begun to ask me questions, but I couldn't answer them straight. I didn't know which end of me was up, because these men was in such a fidget now that some of them was wanting to start right now and lay for them desperadoes, and saying it warn't but a few minutes to midnight, and others was trying to get them to hold on and wait for the sheep signal, and here was Auntie pegging away at the questions, and me a shaking all over and ready to sink down in my tracks, I was that scared, and the place getting hotter and hotter, and the butter beginning to melt and run down my neck and behind my ears, and pretty soon when one of them says, "I'm for going and getting in the cabin first, and right now, and catching them when they come," I most dropped, and a streak of butter come a-trickling down my forehead, and Aunt Sally she sees it, and turns white as a sheet and says, "For the land's sake, what is the matter with the child? He's got the brain fever as sure as you're born, and they're oozing out." And everybody runs to see, and she snatches off my hat, and out comes the bread and what was left of the butter, and she grabbed me and hugged me and says, Oh, what a turn you did give me, and how glad and grateful I am it ain't no worse. For luck's against us, and it never rains but it pours. And when I see that truck, I thought we'd lost you, for I knowed by the color and all it was just like your brains would be if— Dear, why didn't you tell me that was what you'd been down there for? I wouldn't have cared. Now clear out to bed and don't let me see no more of you till morning. I was upstairs in a second, and down the lightning rod in another one, and shinning through the dark for the lean-to. I couldn't hardly get my words out, I was so anxious, but I told Tom as quick as I could we must jump for it now, and not a minute to lose. The house full of men yonder, with guns. His eyes just blazed, and he says, "No, is that so? Ain't it bully? Why, Huck, if I was to do it over again, I bet I could fetch 200. If we could put it off till— Hurry, I says. Where's Jim? Right at your elbow. If you reach out your arm, you can touch him. He's dressed and everything's ready. Now we'll slide out and give the sheep signal." But then we heard the tramp of men come into the door, and heard them begin to fumble with the padlock, and heard a man say, "I told you we'd be too soon. They haven't come. The door's locked. Here, I'll lock some of you into the cabin, and you lay for 'em in the dark, and kill 'em when they come, and the rest scatter round a piece and listen if you can hear 'em coming." So in they come, but couldn't see us in the dark, and most tried on us whilst we was hustling to get under the bed. But we got under all right and out through the hole, swift but soft. Jim first, me next, and Tom last, which was according to Tom's orders. Now we was in the lean-to, and heard trampin's close by outside, so we crept to the door, and Tom stopped us there and put his eye to the crack, but couldn't make out nothing, it was so dark, and whispered and said he would listen for the steps to get further, and when he nudged us Jim must slide out first and him last. So he set his ear to the crack and listened and listened and listened, and the steps a-scraping around out there all the time, and at last he nudged us, and we slid out and stooped down, not breathing, and not making the least noise, and slipped stealthy towards the fence in Injun file, and got to it all right, and me and Jim over it, but Tom's britches catched fast on a splinter on the top rail, and then he hear the steps coming, so he had to pull loose, which snapped the splinter and made a noise, and as he dropped in our tracks and started, somebody sings out, "Who's that? Answer or I'll shoot." But we didn't answer. We just unfurled our heels and shoved. Then there was a rush and a bang, 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 and the bullets fairly whizzed around us. We heard them sing out, "Here they are! They broke for the river! After 'em, boys, and turn loose the dogs!" So here they come, full tilt. We could hear them because they wore boots and yelled, but we didn't wear no boots and didn't yell. We was in the path to the mill, and when they got pretty close on to us we dodged into the bush and let them go by, and then dropped in behind them. They'd had all the dogs shut up so they wouldn't scare off the robbers, but by this time somebody had let them loose, and here they come, making powwow enough for 1,000,000, but they was our dogs, so we stopped in our tracks till they ketched up, and when they see it warn't nobody but us, and no excitement to offer them, they only just said howdy, and tore right ahead towards the shouting and clattering, and then we up steam again, and whizzed along after them till we was nearly to the mill, and then struck up through the bush to where my canoe was tied, and hopped in and pulled for dear life towards the middle of the river, but didn't make no more noise than we was obleeged to. Then we struck out, easy and comfortable, for the island where my raft was, and we could hear them yelling and barking at each other all up and down the bank, till we was so far away the sounds got dim and died out, and when we stepped onto the raft, I says, "Now, old Jim, you're a free man again, and I bet you won't ever be a slave no more." And a mighty good job it was, too, Huck. It is planned beautiful, and it is done beautiful, and they ain't nobody can get up a plan that's more mixed up and splendid than what that one was. We was all glad as we could be, but Tom was the gladdest of all, because he had a bullet in the calf of his leg. When me and Jim heard that, we didn't feel so brash as what we did before. It was hurting him considerable and bleeding, so we laid him in the wigwam and tore up one of the Duke's shirts for to bandage him. But he says, "Gimme the rags. I can do it myself. Don't stop now. Don't fool around here. and the evasion booming along so handsome. Man the sweeps and set her loose. Boys, we done it elegant, 'deed we did. I wish we'd a had the handling of Louis XVI. There wouldn't been a no son of St. Louis ascend to heaven, wrote down in his biography. No, sir, we'd a whooped him over the border. That's what we'd a done with him, and done it just as slick as nothing at all, too. Man the sweeps! Man the sweeps! But me and Jim was consultin' and thinkin', and after we'd thought a minute, I says, "Say it, Jim." So he says, "Well, den this is de way it looked to me, Huck. If it was him dat is being set free, one of de boys was to get shot, would he say, 'Go on and save me, never mind by de doctor for to save dis one'? Is dat like Mars Tom Sawyer? Would he say dat? You bet he wouldn't. Well, den is Jim gwine to say it? No, sah. I don't budge a step outen dis place dout a doctor, not if it's 40 year." I knowed he was white inside, and I reckoned he'd say what he did say, so it was all right now, and I told Tom I was a-goin' for a doctor. He raised considerable row about it, but me and Jim stuck to it and wouldn't budge, so he was for crawling out and setting the raft loose himself, but we wouldn't let him. Then he gives us a piece of his mind, but it didn't do no good. So when he sees me getting the canoe ready, he says, "Well, then, if you're bound to go, I'll tell you the way to do when you get to the village. Shut the door and blindfold the doctor tight and fast, and make him swear to be silent as the grave, and put a purse full of gold in his hand, and then take and lead him all around the back alleys and everywheres in the dark, and then fetch him here in the canoe in a roundabout way amongst the islands, and search him and take his chalk away from him, and don't give it back to him until you get him back to the village, or else he will chalk this raft so he can find it again. It's the way they all do." So I said I would, and left, and Jim was to hide in the woods when he sees the doctor coming till he was gone again. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Annie Coleman in St. Louis, Missouri in July 2006. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 41. The doctor was an old man, a very nice, kind-looking old man when I got him up. I told him me and my brother was over on Spanish Island hunting yesterday afternoon, and camped on a piece of raft we found. And about midnight he must have kicked his gun in his dreams, for it went off and shot him in the leg, and we wanted him to go over there and fix it and not say nothing about it, nor let nobody know, because we wanted to come home this evening and surprise the folks. "Who is your folks?" he says. "The Phelpses, down yonder." "Oh," he says, and after a minute he says, "How'd you say he got shot?" "He had a dream," I says, "and it shot him." "Singular dream," he says. So he lit up his lantern and got his saddlebags and we started. But when he sees the canoe, he didn't like the look of her. Said she was big enough for one, but didn't look pretty safe for two. I says, "Oh, you needn't be afeard, sir. She carried the three of us easy enough." "What three?" "Why, me and Sid and the guns. That's what I mean." "Oh," he says. But he put his foot on the gunwale and rocked her and shook his head and said he reckoned he'd look round for a bigger one, but they was all locked and chained. So he took my canoe and said for me to wait till he come back, or I could hunt around further, or maybe I better go down home and get them ready for the surprise if I wanted to. But I said I didn't, so I told him just how to find the raft, and then he started. I struck an idea pretty soon. I says to myself, "S'posen he can't fix that leg just in 3 shakes of a sheep's tail, as the sayin' is. S'posen it takes him 3 or 4 days. What are we going to do, lay around there till he lets the cat out of the bag? No, sir, I know what I'll do. I'll wait. When he comes back, if he says he's got to go any more, I'll get down there too, if I swim, and we'll take and tie him and keep him and shove out down the river, and when Tom's done with him, we'll give him what it's worth, or all we got, and then let him get ashore." So then I crept into a lumber pile to get some sleep, and next time I waked up the sun was away up over my head. I shot out and went for the doctor's house, but they told me he'd gone away in the night sometime or other and warn't back yet. Well, thinks I, that looks powerful bad for Tom, and I'll dig out for the island right off. So away I shoved, and turned the corner, and nearly rammed my head into Uncle Silas's stomach. He says, "Why, Tom, where you been all this time, you rascal?" "I hain't been nowheres," I says, "only just hunting for the runaway nigger, me and Sid." "Why, wherever did you go?" he says. "Your auntie's been mighty uneasy." "She needn't," I says, "because we was all right. We followed the men and the dogs, but they outrun us and we lost them. But we thought we heard them on the water, so we got a canoe and took out after them and crossed over, but couldn't find nothing of them, so we cruised along up shore till we got kind of tired and beat out, and tied up the canoe and went to sleep and never waked up till about an hour ago. Then we paddled over here to hear the news, and Sid's at the post office to see what he can hear, and I'm a-branching out to get something to eat for us, and then we're going home." So then we went to the post office to get Sid, but just as I suspicioned he weren't there. So the old man he got a letter out of the office, and we waited a while longer, but Sid didn't come. So the old man said, "Come along, let Sid foot it home, or canoe it, when he got done fooling around, but we would ride." I couldn't get him to let me stay and wait for Sid, and he said there warn't no use in it, and I must come along, and let Aunt Sally see we was all right. When we got home, Aunt Sally was that glad to see me she laughed and cried both, and hugged me and give me one of them lickings of hern that don't amount to shucks, and said she'd serve Sid the same when he come. And the place was plumb full of farmers and farmers' wives to dinner, and such another clack a body never heard. Old Mrs. Hotchkiss was the worst. Her tongue was a-going all the time. She says, "Well, Sister Phelps, I've ransacked that 'ere cabin over, and I believe the nigger was crazy. I says to Sister Damrell, didn't I, Sister Damrell? Says I, he's crazy, says I. Them's the very words I said. You all hearing me. He's crazy, says I. Everything shows it, says I. Look at that 'ere grindstone, says I. Want to tell me to any creature in his right mind's going to scrabble all them crazy things onto a grindstone, says I. Here such and such in person busted his heart, and here and so pegged along for 37 year, and all that. Natural son of Lewis, somebody, and such everlasting rubbish. He's plumb crazy, says I. That's what I says in the first place. It's what I says in the middle, and it's what I says last and all the time. The nigger's crazy. Crazy's Nebuchadnezzar, says I." "And look at that 'ere ladder, made out in rags, Sister Hotchkiss," said old Mrs. Damrell. "What in the name of goodness could he ever want of—" "The very words I was a-saying no longer in this minute to Sister Utterback, and she'll tell you so herself. Says she, 'Look at that 'ere rag ladder,' says she, and says I, 'Yes, look at it,' says I. 'What could he have wanted of it,' says I. She, Sister Hotchkiss, she—" "But how in the nation they'd ever git that grindstone in there, anyway? And who dug that 'ere hole? And who—" "My very words, Brer Penrod. I was a-sayin', pass that 'ere sasser of molasses, won't ye? I was a-sayin' to Sister Dunlap just this minute, how did they get that grindstone in there, says I? Without help, mind you, without help. That's where 'tis. Don't tell me, says I. There was help, says I, and there was a-plenty help, too, says I. There's been a dozen a helping that nigger, and I laid I'd skin every last nigger on this place, but I'd find out who done it, says I, and moreover, says I—" "A dozen, says you? 40 couldn't have done everything that's been done. Look at them case knife saws and things, how tedious they've been made. Look at that bed leg sawed off with them. A week's work for 6 men. Look at that nigger made out in straw on the bed, and look at—" "You may well say, Brer Hightower, it's just as I was saying to Brer Phelps' own self. Says he, 'What do you think of it, Sister Hotchkiss?' says he. 'Think of what, Brer Phelps?' says I. 'Think of that bed leg sawed off that-a-way,' says he. 'Think of it,' says I. 'I lay I never sawed itself off,' says I. 'Somebody sawed it,' says I. 'That's my opinion, take it or leave it. It mayn't be no count,' says I, 'but sich as it is, it's my opinion,' says I. 'And if anybody can start a better one,' says I, 'let him do it,' says I, 'that's all.' I says to Sister Dunlap, says I, 'Well, dog my cats. They must have been a house full of niggers in there every night for 4 weeks to have done all that work, Sister Phelps. Look at that shirt. Every last inch of it covered over with secret African writing done with blood. Must have been a raft of 'em at it right along, all the time a'most. Why, I'd give $2 to have it read to me. And as for the niggers that wrote it, I allow I'd take and lash 'em till—" "People to help him, Brother Marples? Well, I reckon you'd think so if you'd been in this house for a while back. Why, they've stole everything they could lay their hands on, and we a-watching all the time, mind you. They stole that shirt right off of the line, and as for that sheet they made the rag ladder out of, there ain't no telling how many times they didn't steal that. And flour and candles and candlesticks and spoons and the old warming pan, and most 1,000 things that I disremember now, and my new calico dress, and me and Silas and my sitting time on the constant watch, day and night, as I was a-telling you, and not a one of us could catch hide nor hair, nor sight nor sound of them. And here at the last minute, lo and behold you, they slides right in under our noses and fools us. Not only fools us, but the Injun Territory robbers, too, and actually gets away with that nigger safe and sound, and with that 16 men and 22 dogs right on their very heels at that very time. I tell you, it just bangs anything I ever heard of. Why, spirits couldn't have done it better and been no smarter, and I reckon they must have been spirits, because you know our dogs, and there ain't no better. Well, them dogs never even got on the track of 'em once. You explain that to me if you can, any of you. Well, it does beat. Laws alive, I never. So help me, I wouldn't be house thieves as well as. Goodness gracious sakes, I'd have been afeard to live in such a. Afraid to live? Why, I was that scared I dasn't hardly go to bed, or get up, or lay down, or sit down, Sister Ridgway. Why, they'd steal the very. Why, goodness sakes, you can guess what kind of a fluster I was in by the time midnight come last night. I hope to gracious if I weren't afraid they'd steal some of the family. I was just to that pass I didn't have no reasoning faculties no more. It looks foolish enough now in the daytime, but I says to myself, there's my 2 poor boys asleep way upstairs in that lonesome room, and I declare to goodness I was that uneasy that I crept up there and locked 'em in, I did. And anybody would, because, you know, when you get scared that way, and it keeps running on and getting worse and worse all the time, and your wits get to addling, and you get to doing all sorts of wild things, and by you think to yourself, supposing I was a boy, and was away up here, and the door ain't locked, and you. She stopped, looking kind of wondering, and then she turned her head around slow. When her eye lit on me, I got up and took a walk. Says I to myself, I can explain better how we come to not be in that room this morning if I go out to one side and study over it a little. So I done it, but I dasn't go fur, or she'd 'a sent for me. And when it was late in the day, the people all went. And then I come in and told her the noise and shooting waked up me and Sid, and the door was locked, and we wanted to see the fun. So we went down the lightning rod, and both of us got hurt a little, and we didn't never want to try that no more. And then I went on and told her all what I told Uncle Silas before. And then she said she'd forgive us, and maybe it was all right enough anyway, and about what a body might expect of boys, for all boys was a pretty harum-scarum lot as fur as she could see. And so, as long as no harm hadn't come of it, she judged she better put in her time being grateful we was alive and well, and she had us still, 'stead of fretting over what was past and done. So then she kissed me and patted me on the head and dropped into a kind of a brown study, and pretty soon jumps up and says, "Why, laws a mercy, it's most night and Sid's not come yet. What has become of that boy?" I see my chance, so I skips up and says, "I'll run right up to town and get him," I says. "No, you won't," she says. "You'll stay right where you are. One's enough to be lost at a time. If he ain't here to supper, your uncle'll go." Well, he weren't there to supper, so right after supper, Uncle went. He come back about 10, a little bit uneasy, hadn't run across Tom's tracks. Aunt Sally was a good deal uneasy, but Uncle Silas, he said there warn't no occasion to be. Boys will be boys, he said, and you'll see this one turn up in the morning all sound and right. So she had to be satisfied, but she said she'd set up for him a while anyway and keep a light burning so he could see it. And then, when I went to bed, she come up with me and fetched her candle and tucked me in and mothered me so good I felt mean, and like I couldn't look her in the face. And she sat down on the bed and talked with me a long time, and said what a splendid boy Sid was, and didn't seem to want to ever stop talking about him, and kept asking me every now and then if I reckoned he could 'a' got lost or hurt or maybe drownded and might be layin' at this minute somewhere sufferin' or dead, and she not by him to help him. And so the tears would drip down silent, and I would tell her that Sid was all right and would be home in the mornin', sure, and she would squeeze my hand or maybe kiss me and tell me to say it again and keep on sayin' it, because it done her good and she was in so much trouble. And when she was going away, she looked down in my eyes so steady and gentle, and says, "The door ain't going to be locked, Tom, and there's the window and the rod, but you'll be good, won't you? And you won't go? For my sake." Laws knows, I wanted to go bad enough to see about Tom, and was all intendin' to go, but after that I wouldn't 'a' went, not for kingdoms. But she was on my mind, and Tom was on my mind, so I slept very restless, and twice I went down the right way in the night and slipped around front and see her settin' there by her candle in the window with her eyes towards the road and the tears in them, and I wished I could do something for her, but I couldn't, only to swear that I wouldn't never do nothing to grieve her any more. And the third time I waked up at dawn and slid down, and she was there yet, and her candle was most out, and her old gray head was restin' on her hand, and she was asleep. End of chapter 41.